Jesus is God. Jesus is Lord. Jesus has the victory.
We all have a call to greatness, a desire for it. We want to do something good.
Now is your time. You could change the world, and the world needs changing. So get busy.
Shalom World, God's own channel.
Welcome to today's program. I'm Joseph Nesta, and it is an honor and a privilege to be here with you today and also with Bishop Michael Barber of the Diocese of Oakland. I'd like to welcome you in that vein, Bishop. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Joseph, for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, one of the things we always want to know about is really the beginning of maybe family life, your early years. Tell us a little bit about what it was like for you growing up and your family life.
Well, my family of mom and dad, both deceased now, but San Francisco are my earliest memories. I was baptized in Mission Dolores Mission in the same baptismal font that Father Sarah used to baptize all the Indians. And so I always have liked that. And my first memories of going to church were in that basilica of Mission Dolores. I'm the oldest of three boys, so I have a middle brother, 2 years younger than me, who's a Jesuit priest also. He teaches at Loyola High School in Los Angeles. He used to be chaplain at San Quentin Prison for 7 years, so when he was there, I used to help him out. Then I have a younger brother that's married and has 3 children and lives in Tennessee. So I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school most of the time.
Wonderful.
My mom took us to Mass, but my dad didn't practice except for Christmas and Easter.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, what was his position in terms of having 2 of his children grow up to be priests?
Oh yeah, well, my dad always told us when we were kids, want you to be happy and you can be whatever you want in life. So as our discernment and journey, as we grew up, both my brother and I thought of being priests. Then we both decided we wanted to be in religious orders, even though we had a spectacular pastor at our parish, but we both felt called to religious life and we liked the Jesuits.
So in your early years, was there ever a time where you considered being something other than a priest? And if so, what would you envision yourself possibly of having thought of?
Well, when I was real young and the Mass was still in Latin, and everything was in Latin, as a little boy I thought, I'll never be able to learn Latin, so maybe I could be a brother. And my dad drove us up one weekend, because we lived in the Bay Area, we went up to Mount LaSalle and drove around the Christian Brothers property. And at that time they had, 50, 100 brothers out there, young in the habits, out on the grounds on Sunday and visiting day. And so I thought, maybe I could be a brother, because you don't have to know Latin to be a priest, so, but you could be a teacher still. So.
Right, interesting. Do you recall a particular moment, and if so, if you could describe it for us, when you knew that the call was there for the priesthood, for you?
Well, the call has always been there for me since I was a little child. So always growing up, I couldn't wait to become an altar boy and serve Mass. And I always thought in the back of my mind, someday I would like to be up there saying Mass. It's from my earliest memories, but I didn't know what kind of priest and that. Mm-hmm. And so when I was in high school, I visited the diocesan seminary in Mountain View, Menlo Park, and then I sent postcards to all the religious orders I could find to read about them and what they did. And I visited some. I visited Franciscan, Dominican, Marist, and the Jesuits. But I do remember when I was a junior in high school waking up on a Saturday morning and knowing that I should apply to the Jesuits. I felt that was it. I do remember that day when it just kind of all coalesced in my mind.
And when you look back on your childhood and then growing up, and you mentioned that your father didn't particularly practice the faith, I'm sure that's probably a question that has come up on more than one occasion, how you explain, your devotion to the faith, given that. And how would you explain that?
Well, like I said, my mom took us to Mass, and she enrolled us in Catholic school. And my mom worked in a high school cafeteria, washing dishes and to make the money to send us to Catholic school. Then she got a job working in a department store, to make the money. So between my mom's faith and the nuns that taught us, that just really helped me. I had really good nuns growing up. I had Dominicans of San Rafael, and they were awesome nuns. Gave me appreciation for the faith. So it wasn't that my dad was against the church, but it didn't play a big role in his life. Mm-hmm. And my mom, she wasn't on the parish council or Eucharist or mission. She wasn't any of that. She just was a normal parishioner.
Okay.
But my grandma, my aunts, great aunts, they were all dyed-in-the-wool Irish Catholic people, and it was just the faith was a real stable, strong presence. And especially when I grew up, started in the pre-Vatican II church, and then when I was in 5th or 6th grade, the Mass changed slowly into English. So it was the early experience of going to Mass, and it was very mysterious, sacred, holy, transcendent. I found very attractive. It's like an opening into heaven.
Indeed, indeed. Now, you, as I understand it, served as spiritual director at a couple of seminaries for a time. Someone had pointed out that very often we see wonderful participation on the part of female parishioners, but what would you say your experience has been in terms of reaching maybe the men who are parishioners and getting them more engaged? What would you say we need to do in that regard?
You bring up a good point that women seem to have a natural affinity for faith. There's something about being a woman and being connected with the spiritual life, with prayer, with an interior life that seems very natural to women. That seems more difficult for men. Not impossible, but I don't know what it is. But I found with men, especially when they're having a crisis or at a time in their life when they feel they can't carry all the responsibilities and burden pushed on them, that they need some extra help, like divine help. So when I talk to men, I always say, to be a husband and be a father, it's very hard to do that all by yourself. Without God making a roof over your head, opening a door for you, giving you job security, helping you raise your kids, all that kind of thing. So I found when, I've been a military chaplain for 25 years, talking to a lot of men and talking about them raising families and stuff.
Precisely.
Going into battle. They're then very open to the reality of God's presence and invite Him into their life. That's kind of where I go. And the more you tell stories of the heroic virtues of the saints, and even people that aren't canonized but are tremendous Catholics, I see especially some soldiers, Marines, naval officers in the line of duty, things they've done that are men of faith. It's very attractive to other men.
I would imagine so. I've heard, and this just kind of popped into my mind, there are those who have commented, and I believe it's a silly way to look at things, but it's out there and I think it's worth taking a look at. There are those who say that maybe men aren't as engaged because they see the faith when there's, like I said, substantial participation, beautiful as it is, of women parishioners, that they tend to look at it as something for women. And so, although as silly as that may sound, how would you respond to that?
Well, Thomas Day in his book, Why Catholics Can't Sing, says some people say the Catholic Church is a women's club with a few male officers, meaning the priests and stuff. So I try and encourage men to have like men's groups at their parish, like Knights of Columbus,
right.
Or just you can call it the men's club or the men's night. And they come and have discussions on things that are of interest to them. They have barbecues, they go to a game together, they have pizza and beer with the pastor, they get speakers to come in. I found that very helpful. And also retreats for men, when they're given the opportunity to go to confession or given a special examination of conscience to help them deal with certain men's temptations and things, they love it usually. And especially if you get the right priest to lead it that knows the men's mindset. I found them to be very successful.
Great ideas, I would say. Now, I understand you did doctoral work in the life of Blessed John Cardinal Newman, yes? And when we look at what, as a theologian and thinker, there is in terms of material there, what would you say about him, especially given your focus on him, speaks most appropriately to our world today?
Well, there's a couple things. I think he's still the best original theologian in the English language. He's not been surpassed, even though he died over 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. He predicted 100 years ago some of the main problems we're dealing with in the world and in the church today. One of them is what he called liberalism. Now, liberalism for him doesn't mean, oh, we like guitar masses and not Gregorian chant, or we vote Democratic and not Republican. No, not at all. Liberalism for him meant that there is no such thing as truth, that there is no such thing as God, that when it comes to truth or religion, people say it's all the same. Mm-hmm. You hear that today. Oh, it's all the same.
Sure.
Doesn't matter. Or, you could be this religion, you could be that, it's all the same.
Or that they're spiritual and not religious.
Yeah. And he predicted that, and he said, he was fortunate to live in an era, he said, when everyone really believed in God, and therefore there were a lot of wars between Protestant and Catholic and this and that. Now those wars mean nothing. Now it's between, is there a God or not? The stakes are much higher when people really don't believe in God at all. And as Chesterton said, once people stop believing in God, it's not that they don't believe in anything, it's that they believe in every single thing that comes along. Mm. And so ecology can become the new God.
Right, or Mother Earth.
Yeah, there you go. So they just replace God with something else, and that's what we call idolatry.
That leads into one of my questions, and that is, what would you say the best response is as believers to the increasing spread of secularization and atheism?
I think if we can provide in the Catholic Church an experience, a place, a liturgy, music, a prayer, or a person that reflects God and the transcendent, and invite people to participate in that, then they get a taste of something that they've never experienced before, and we're halfway there. But I mean, sometimes people are drawn to our church by Gregorian chant. Just even though they don't know what it means, it creates an atmosphere where they feel in the presence of God, even if they can't say this is God. They feel they're in a different place. I've been brought to a different place. Incense, Catholic liturgy, a beautiful cathedral or church, when they come in and go, oh wow, that experience of awe,
yes,
or the experience of transcendence. Okay, let's capitalize on that and provide that, rather than dumb down our liturgy, dumb down our music treasury, dumb down our homilies, dumb down our church architecture to make it so plain that you can't tell if a church is a Pizza Hut or Bank of America or a Catholic church. Whoa, let's stop. Let's go back to the riches of the Catholic treasury and tradition that we've been given and invite people to be part of that.
I've heard the term coined, presentism, which is this idea that if it's new and in the present, that it's somehow better. But I would agree that the treasury of the church in terms of her architecture, her music, is indeed the sort of thing that is transcendent. And I can vouch for the Gregorian chant being something that literally transports the listener to a different space, and very well put. Would you say then in that regard that Pope John Paul II was something of a prophetic voice when he spoke about the need for new evangelization? One tends to think, well, the Americas were evangelized and Christianized, job is done, but apparently not so. Wouldn't you say that Pope John Paul's call for the new evangelization is as vibrant or as necessary today?
Oh, definitely. but I think we have to be very creative and clever in how we do that. Now, we started here something on November 1st, November 2nd, actually, Feast of All Souls. So the past 2 years, we have produced at great expense Fauré's Requiem with an orchestra, with a choir, and we've publicized it. And a lot of people came to hear the music, but it wasn't just a concert. We have a Requiem Mass with the music accompanying it. So people came for the music, but experienced a Mass. And I did that because I thought it's not fair that people have to pay $50 and go to a concert hall in San Francisco to hear music that was composed for the Catholic Mass. And so when they come in, they love the music. The music brings them into the presence of God. We have the whole ritual of the Mass. And I do a Mass in Latin on that day. I do wear black vestments, chant the Mass in Latin to complement the music experience. And I looked out at the congregation, and about half of them you could tell were not Catholic. People didn't make the sign of the cross.
Right.
Here's one way. We're going to try doing that at Christmas time too, by having, experiences in our cathedral that may not be the Mass, because sometimes that scares off people. That,
Sure.
Oh, I'm not religious, or I'll stick out, or I won't know what to do.
Right.
But we've had the ceremony of lessons and carols, or a Christmas concert, or Handel's Messiah. People, oh, I'd love to come to that. Then they get in your church. Now, we've had the Chanticleer choir from San Francisco come over. They're a secular choir, but they sing these beautiful Christmas concerts. They sell CDs and stuff. They're really quite good. They love singing in our cathedral because of the acoustics. So they give me free tickets, so I go. At intermission, all these people were coming up to me. Do you have a choir sings here? When can we come back? I said, you can come tomorrow for the 10 o'clock Mass and hear our choir and hear the organ and all that. Oh, I'd love to come. So you get them in the door, you get them to see the cathedral, you get them in a Catholic church, and maybe music and culture can lead people in. If they feel they're in the presence of God, then they might be open to a life of prayer. Then they may be open to consider our moral way of life and stuff. But you can't just put the moral life first. Let them make friends with Jesus first, have a relationship with God. The other way for evangelization I found very effective is through the corporal works of mercy. So our St. Vincent de Paul Kitchen, the Catholic worker movement in Oakland. So I go to the St. Vincent de Paul Kitchen. They serve a couple hundred lunches a day there to the poor. In the kitchen, the guys cooking the food are usually just out of jail or prison, and they're getting their culinary certificates so they can get a job in a restaurant. So it's win-win. And so I'm there handing out the trays of food, and I asked the guy next to me, who's also a volunteer, what parish are you from? And he says, oh, I'm not Catholic, I'm Jewish. I just really love being here. You see, when you're participating in a work of mercy that's being run by the church, you're dealing with Christ's work, even if you don't name Christ. Same with the, we call the Catholic worker movement. On Sunday mornings, from time to time in Berkeley, we serve free hot breakfast to the homeless in People's Park and into the Civic Center Park in Berkeley. And all these kids show up from Cal, and some of them are from the Catholic Newman Center, and some are from, or I go to the Presbyterian, or I go to the Jewish, or one just goes says, well, I don't have any religion, I just love being here. And yet it's the Catholic worker. It's being given in the name of Jesus. We say a prayer before we serve the homeless. People participate in our works, and it's attracting them to Jesus, who went around feeding and healing and stuff.
Bishop Barber, of course, refocusing on helping parishioners and the flock, so to speak, know a little bit more about the person of Bishop Barber. What, if you could share from your own personal experience of having been a priest, now a bishop, what's been the greatest joy in your life in service to the church?
Oh, it's hard to say which one. Although I joined the Jesuits because I wanted to teach high school, and I did teach high school for about 5 years, and I loved it. What I really find joyful is when people have an experience that I've been able to participate in or witness when they come closer to the Lord, whether it's in the confessional especially, or in a counseling situation where they feel God's love and mercy flowing over them. I find that very, very satisfying, especially in the confessional. when you can't share with anyone because of the sacred seal of confession. I've seen that with high school kids, seen it in the seminary and hearing confessions there, and I've seen it in the military when men have carried around big burdens their whole life and have finally come and been able to close the door and trust God and trust the priest and open up. I find that extremely courageous, but also I find I'm a witness of God's grace and love, using me as just a mere instrument. I would say that is the most seriously satisfying thing that I've experienced.
And what would you say the greatest challenge to you personally, being a bishop and a priest, has been?
The greatest challenge is not to become discouraged when we notice how secular our culture has been and how it's getting more and more anti-religious, anti-God, anti-Catholic. To not give up, to not become sour, to not be, like I say, become discouraged. Keep faith in, we got to keep our faith, keep our optimism, keep our joy. No one wants a depressed Catholic or a sour Catholic.
Right.
But, and also to stick together. The more opposition there is to our faith, the closer we need to come together, the closer we need to come to the Lord and spend more time in prayer, but also in fellowship and in sharing and in spiritual friendship and encourage each other. I find that very consoling, and as we make converts or as people who convert to Christ, rejoice in that. I mean, we had this year, we have these rites of election where groups come from every parish that are converting to the Catholic faith. Mm-hmm. Two of my biggest groups that came are from the Newman Center at Cal Berkeley and St. Mary's College in Moraga. Oh, young wow. people, college age, wow. Big groups coming in. So you see grace operating there.
Now, I understand that you're involved in the Ignatian exercises and things of that nature in terms of refilling the tank, so to speak, spiritually. What could you share, maybe briefly, that you find is most of service in that regard for you?
Well, being a Jesuit and being a spiritual director in a seminary, I was in charge of all the retreats, the days of recollection, and trying to help the seminarians grow in a life of prayer and in their relationship with our Lord. And now I find I've been invited to give priest retreats around the country and in Canada. I can't do too many because you're away for a week at a time to do that, but I love doing that and sharing whatever help God has given me in my prayer life with other priests. So I do that, but I'm quickly a hypocrite if I don't pray myself, and then I try and you think you're someone who can teach others to pray? Why don't you pray yourself first? But I know I've never found it harder to pray than when I've been a bishop because of the time constraints. Especially if you have an early mass somewhere at another parish, you got to get up early, and get your prayer time in. Or even sometimes I find I'm preparing a homily in the car on the way there. I have a priest secretary driving me. That's not really good, but sometimes those are the realities. When you have so many demands on your time, and then the evenings are taken up with fundraising receptions, parish visitations, dinners, hosting the heads of Catholic charities or the priest council. It's just boom, boom, boom. There's so many demands on your time. It takes a lot to discipline to carve out the time for prayer and give the Lord his due.
Bishop, you mentioned having explored the possibility and looking at different religious orders. So the obvious question is, why the Jesuits?
Well, when I was a young man and I looked at different orders, I admired a lot of them. I remember spending a weekend at the Dominican Priory here in Oakland as a boy and really being fascinated. I liked it, but somehow it didn't feel like me. But when I met the Jesuits, the more I read about St. Ignatius and his motto, ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God, I felt a resonance in my heart. I said, yeah, that's what I want. And when the Jesuits, I asked, what's the main apostolate work of a priest? They said, well, it could be teaching, but it could be missionary work. It could be parish work. It could be retreat work. It could be anything that's for the greater glory of God. I liked that. And then I also liked that the Jesuits would take a young man, find out what qualities or abilities you had, and try and develop those for the service of the church. There wasn't a cookie cutter approach. So all of that, when I met the Jesuits, I kept being drawn more and more toward them, and it felt like the shoe fit. And so when I was invited to make a retreat at the Jesuit novitiate, and I got there, I just felt like this was home, that this is where I belonged. And I liked that I could be a teacher, or I could also be a foreign missionary and learn another language, or all of that appealed to me very much.
In closing, Bishop, is there any thought, maybe something that has been on your mind and on your heart of late, that you would like to share with our viewers? Just maybe a word of wisdom, or some inspirational thought, or just...
Yeah. I've been bishop now 3.5 years, and I wasn't a bishop auxiliary or anything. It just went whammo overnight, being in charge of a diocese and being presented with the enormous financial challenges here in our diocese. We have a $115 million debt and $7 million a year we're paying on interest. Just kind of whammo, overwhelming.
Right.
And so we had a capital campaign, we're trying to do that. What I really would have liked to do would be have a capital campaign of prayer first for a whole year, totally disconnected from money or that, and just say, okay, we're going to have hours of adoration in our parishes. We're going to have prayer workshops. We're going to have retreats and days of recollection for our people. We're going to start the Divine Mercy. We're going to have a Rosary Guild. We're going to teach meditation. Whatever it is, I would have loved to have a great spiritual reawakening in our diocese to bring people closer to Jesus, and then talk about money later. This is if the house wasn't on fire, at the time.
Right.
Because the more I'm at this, the more I realize God's providence guides the world, guides the church, guides our dioceses, guides our parish. And the more we can plug into that and become instruments of God's power and see Him as the main actor, and not me and not the pastor, but we're the servants, the more helpful that is. So the more time in prayer the parishioners spend, prayer changes things. It works. The more we'll get vocations, our problems will be solved. People blessed with great riches, will help the church and share it. That all comes from prayer. So
Yes.
That's what I hope for.
What a wonderful note to end on. I want to thank you so very much, Bishop, for your time, having spoken of how important it is and how difficult it is for you to attend to everything that's there. We certainly appreciate the amount of time that you've spent with us here at Shalom.
Thank you, Joseph, for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here and to be on your program.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Bishop.
God bless.
Did you like the program you just watched? Help Shalom World bring more programs like this to a global audience. Your support helps us share the peace of Christ with the world. Visit shalomworld.org/donate